In the kingdom of Silverfang, the packland stretched across misty mountains and dense forests, ruled by wolves who prided themselves on strength, speed, and the ancient bond they shared with their animal spirits. Every child in the kingdom waited eagerly for the day their wolf would awaken inside them. Every child, except Alira. She was 17 when her wolf never came. While other children her age began to shift into their animal forms during the moon ceremony, Alira stood alone in the crowd, human and silent, as the elders whispered the word that would follow her for the rest of her life. Wolfless. 10 years had passed since that night. Alira now worked as a kitchen maid in the grand palace of Silverfang, chopping vegetables, carrying trays, and scrubbing floors from dawn until the moon rose high above the towers. She rarely spoke unless spoken to. She kept her eyes low and her hands busy, because in a kingdom built on wolves, a wolfless human was seen as barely more than a servant with no worth beyond her labor. The other maids often mocked her behind cupped hands, calling her the broken girl or the empty one. Alira never argued back. She simply worked harder, moved quieter, and disappeared into the background of palace life, as if by making herself small enough, the world might finally leave her alone. What no one knew, not even Alira herself, was that she carried something inside her that no wolfless human should have. When others were injured, she felt an unusual stillness settle over her, a strange clarity that told her exactly what a wound needed. When sickness spread through the servants' quarters, she always seemed to know which herbs would ease a fever, which roots could stop bleeding, which teas could calm a poisoned stomach. She told herself it was simply something she had picked up from her mother, who had died when Alira was young. She never questioned it further. Questions were dangerous for someone already viewed as different. The palace was preparing for a great feast the night everything changed. Alpha King Draven Ashworth, ruler of Silverfang, was hosting delegates from a neighboring pack in hopes of securing a fragile peace between their territories. Tensions between the two kingdoms had simmered for years, and many believed war was only a matter of time. The feast was meant to be a symbol of goodwill, a night where old enemies might finally speak as equals. Alira was assigned to help serve the head table, an honor she neither wanted nor asked for. She kept her gaze on the trays she carried, careful not to draw attention as she moved past nobles dressed in silk and fur, their laughter loud, their eyes sharp with judgment whenever they noticed her. King Draven sat at the center of it all. He was younger than most rulers, only 28, but his presence filled the hall the way a storm fills the sky before it breaks. His eyes were the color of dark amber, sharp and assessing, missing nothing. He was known throughout the kingdom as a warrior first and a king second, a man who had fought in more battles than he could count and had never once lost. Yet despite his fearsome reputation, there was something tired in the way he sat that night. Something Alira noticed, even from a distance, though she could not explain why she noticed it at all. The trouble began quietly. One of the visiting delegates raised a toast to peace, and the king lifted his goblet along with the rest of the hall. Alira was refilling water near the far end of the table when she saw it. A flicker of movement, a servant she did not recognize slipping something into the king's cup before disappearing into the crowd. She opened her mouth to call out, but it was too late. The king drank. Within moments, his face turned pale. His hand trembled as he set down the goblet, and then he collapsed, his large frame crashing against the table as gasps and screams erupted through the hall. Guards rushed forward, nobles scattered. The royal healers were summoned immediately, but as they examined him, panic spread across their faces. "This is not a poison we recognize," one healer said, his voice shaking. "Our magic cannot touch it." The king's breathing grew shallow, his skin turned a sickly gray. The elders, who governed alongside the king in matters of law and tradition, stood at the edges of the chaos, their expressions grim, already preparing for the unthinkable. Alira did not remember deciding to move. Her feet simply carried her forward, weaving through the panicked crowd until she reached the king's side. The strange stillness she always felt near sickness and wounds settled over her now, stronger than ever before, as if her body understood something her mind could not yet explain. "Someone bring me fever root from the kitchen stores," she said. "The kind that grows near the eastern wall, the one with the silver-veined leaves. Hurry." A young guard, too startled to question her, ran to obey. When he returned with the root, Elira crushed it quickly between two stones, mixing it with water from a nearby pitcher. She knelt beside the king, tilted his head gently, and pressed the mixture to his lips. "Swallow," she whispered, "please." For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. Then the king's throat moved. He swallowed. His body convulsed once, twice, and then slowly, the gray color began to fade from his skin. His breathing deepened. The healers, stunned into silence, checked his pulse and found it steady. The king of Silverfang would live. The hall erupted into murmurs of disbelief. The elders, who moments ago had been preparing to speak the morning words, now stared at Elira as though she were a stranger who had appeared from nowhere. Their disbelief quickly hardened into suspicion. "Who gave a servant permission to touch the king?" one elder demanded, his voice sharp with anger rather than gratitude. "She could have finished the poison's work herself. She saved him," the young guard argued. "You all watched her do it." But the elders were not interested in what they had witnessed. They were interested in what it meant. A wolfless human, someone with no rank, no pack magic, no shifting ability, had succeeded where trained healers had failed. To them, this was not a miracle. It was a threat to everything they understood about the natural order of their world. Elira was seized before she could explain herself, dragged from the king's side, and thrown into a small holding room deep within the palace, accused of conspiring with the assassin simply because she had known what to do when no one else did. She sat alone in the dark for hours, her hands still trembling from crushing the root, her heart pounding with the fear that saving a life might cost her own. She had spent 10 years trying to remain invisible, and in one moment, she had undone all of it. The door finally opened near dawn. She expected guards. Instead, King Draven stood in the doorway, still pale from his ordeal, but very much alive, dismissing the guards with a single motion of his hand. "Leave us." When they were alone, he studied her for a long moment, his amber eyes searching her face as though trying to solve a puzzle. "You saved my life," he said finally, "and my elders repaid you with a prison cell. Tell me how a wolfless maid knew a cure that trained healers did not." Elira lowered her eyes. "I only remembered something my mother once taught me, my lord. Nothing more." "I do not believe you," he said, though not unkindly. "But I will not force the truth from you tonight. You are free to go, and you are no longer a kitchen maid. From this day forward, you will assist the royal healers directly, under my protection." The elders protested loudly when they learned of his decision, but Draven would not be moved. In the weeks that followed, Elira found herself walking through parts of the palace she never imagined she would enter, working alongside healers who no longer mocked her, but watched her with a mixture of curiosity and reluctant respect. Strange incidents continued. Another assassination attempt was discovered, and stopped only because Elira noticed something wrong with the king's evening tea before he drank it. A hunting accident left one of his generals badly injured, and Elira's quick actions saved the man's leg from being lost entirely. Each time, her instincts proved sharper, more certain, more impossible to explain as simple memory or coincidence. Draven began seeking her out, not only when danger threatened him, but simply to talk. He found himself drawn to her quiet strength, the way she never sought praise for what she did, the calm steadiness that remained even when the world around her grew chaotic. She, in turn, found herself slowly trusting him, something she had never allowed herself to do with anyone since her mother's death. "Why do you hide so much of yourself?" he asked her one evening, as they stood together on a balcony overlooking the mountains. "Because the world has never been kind to what makes me different," she answered honestly. "It is safer to be small." "You are the least small person I have ever known," he said quietly. It was during a private conversation with an old healer, one of the few who had known Elira's mother, that the truth finally began to surface. The healer revealed that Elira's mother had once served in the court of a rival kingdom, one believed destroyed generations ago after a brutal war with Silverfang. Before she died, she had fled with her infant daughter, seeking refuge among the wolfless servants, where no one would think to look for royal blood. Elira's wolf had never awakened, not because she lacked one, but because it had been sealed away by an ancient curse, placed upon her as a baby, to erase every trace of her true heritage and keep her hidden from enemies who would have killed her the moment her identity was known. When this information reached the elders, their fury was immediate and absolute. To them, Illyra was no longer simply an inconvenient mystery. She was the last living heir of a bloodline they had spent decades believing extinguished. A bloodline tied to the very war that had shaped generations of conflict. They demanded her immediate execution, insisting she posed an unacceptable danger to the kingdom's future, regardless of the lives she had saved. Draven refused to allow it. He stood before the council, declaring that no one would harm her while he still drew breath, but the elders invoked ancient law, calling for an emergency tribunal that even the king could not simply overturn. Illyra would be judged, and if found guilty of concealing a dangerous bloodline, she would be put to death before the next moon rose. On the night of the tribunal, as the elders gathered to deliver their verdict, a final assassin, sent by the same rival kingdom that had cursed Illyra as a child, slipped into the palace with one last mission, to finish what the original poison had failed to do. The attack came swiftly, a blade meant for Draven's heart. Illyra, standing beside him despite the danger surrounding her own trial, moved without thinking, throwing herself between the king and the strike. Pain exploded through her, sharp and searing, but in that same instant, something inside her shattered wide open. The curse that had bound her for 17 years broke apart entirely, releasing the wolf that had been sleeping within her since birth. Silver light erupted around her body as her wound began to heal itself before the horrified eyes of everyone present, her wolf spirit finally awakening in full, undeniable power. The elders, who had gathered to condemn her, stood frozen in stunned silence. The strength radiating from her was unlike anything they had witnessed in generations, far exceeding what even their oldest bloodlines could claim. Draven caught her as she steadied herself, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and awe. "You saved me again," he whispered. "I could not lose you," she answered simply, and in that honest admission, every remaining doubt about her loyalty dissolved. Faced with undeniable truth and overwhelming power they could not ignore, the elders had no choice but to withdraw their accusations. What had once been seen as a threat to the kingdom was now recognized as its greatest asset, a bloodline capable of ending, rather than continuing, generations of war. Draven addressed the full court the following morning, his voice steady and certain. "This woman was once called Wolfless, cast aside and forgotten. I now know her as the bravest soul in this kingdom, and I will not let her go unrecognized any longer." He turned to Illyra, kneeling before her in front of every noble and elder present. "I ask you to stand beside me, not as a servant, and not merely as a healer, but as my equal and my queen." Illyra, who had spent a decade believing she would always be invisible, found herself speechless as the entire hall bowed before her, the same elders who had once demanded her death, now lowering their heads in respect. She took Draven's hand, and in that moment, the Wolfless Maid who had once hidden in the shadows became the heart of Silverfang's future, proving that true strength was never about what powers someone was born with, but about the courage they showed when everything was at stake.